Daylight is getting low in the overgrown road that we follow.
You know, John, I would have been the class of 1970, but I was only there between 68 and 69 in my what would have been my senior year, which I turned 18 because they put me back a year to go be a junior at Verde Valley School. I was ready to go do my world travel, so I left and got a GED for my senior year instead of returning to the school. But it really was a transformational year for me. You know, I'll never forget, it was an interesting year because three of my best friends it was an interesting year in that there was this mix of kids from the reservations, kids from China, kids from Africa, and these movie star kids. And I was there in the year that there was Jack Lemmon's son, Walter Matthau's son, and Burgess Meredith's son, and which was sort of fascinating because I'd grown up with these being archetypal stars of my youth, and there I was with their children who were actually like little miniature versions of their fathers in certain ways. And I'm still real close with Jonathan Meredith, who is a musician in Grass Valley, California, Nevada, you know, over there. Anyway, that was wonderful for me to grow up with these different elements, and I made some of my best friends when I was there, who I still am very close with to this day. So I can't imagine what my life would have been like if I had not had that 1 year at Verde Valley School. It was a brief little interruption, but it sort of set my mind straight after being very disillusioned with public school and education, and to go to Verde Valley School that 1 year was a real wake up for me, and I think set my life in a way that I can't imagine if I hadn't have been there. You know, it was interesting. My family moved to Sedona in '67, and I was from Southern California, and it was the peak of the hippie years and all that. And I felt when I was in Arizona, I was like removed from my essence. So I ran away from home and moved back to Southern California, and I think my parents were wise enough to let me, rather than grabbing me out of it, they gave me 3 months over there where I just had to sleep on people's floor, and I was a roadie in a band and had varied experiences, but I came to the conclusion that I really wanted something that I'd heard about, that Verde Valley School existed. So I told my parents I would move back, get a job, and I started working at the Oak Creek Village store, which is downtown Sedona. It's gone now, but it was the grocery store, and I was a bag boy, and met the sheriff of Sedona, Al Brockman, and he drove me in his patrol car out to Verde Valley School and introduced me to the admissions director, and at the time the scholarship guy, Richard Simmons. And Dick and I talked, and he saw some promise or something, and got me a scholarship to the school. I worked all summer. I sold my Harley Davidson motorcycle I had at the time and used that for my tuition to go into the school. And I was one of the first day students there in 1968. There was just 2 or 3 of us at the time, and it was the second year they even had a day student, so it was a kind of a new territory for the school. So that's how I got there, and it surprised me because I had no idea when I moved to Sedona that I would ever end up at a place like Verde Valley School. Two things. One was that you called the teachers by their first names. That was revolutionary to me, that you actually could have an experience with the teachers, and they weren't just some something distant from you. They were actually close. So that was transformational to me. The size of the school being so intimate that I would go to classes with 6 or 7 other students rather than 30 or 40 other students. So I came from a situation where I was being bullied in public high school in Southern California, and to go to Verde Valley School, you were allowed to be what you were. And that was what impressed me, that I felt I finally could, let my hair down. You could grow your hair. I had come from a school where you had to cut your hair. So that was a big deal at the time to me, and it felt like freedom. So that was an early impression, was freedom. Big ones in that several things happened. One was in my process of going to school, there was a bit of this is in the late 60s, so there was all that stuff that the 60s embodied, but there was one little subcult at the school, as I look back, that drew me in, and actually the head of admissions of the scholarship thing at the time was involved with this guru. And so that led me into 5 years of when I left Verde Valley School. I got more intimately involved. When I look back, it was a cult, but as I feel also, it was the perfect cult for me at the time. And I spent 5 years with this guru. I traveled around the world, to India, Sri Lanka, Japan, entered a monastery with the dude, and it was a big change in my life. I actually had to escape from the monastery because I saw that it was a cult, and I think that's part of the process, that you have to become disillusioned with what at the time was a real illusionment for me, but part of the process was to see that and leave it. So I'm still friends with some of those people and spent a fair amount of my life involved with it, but came out the other side. And so that was one of the big influences of Verde Valley School. The other one was there was a mountain climbing program, and this was back in the early days before Outward Bound, and it was called the National Outdoor Leadership School, Knowles. And one of the teachers was an early graduate of Knowles, and he helped me get a scholarship in the summer of 1969. And I spent a 5-week expedition up in the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, and that blew my mind. I turned 18 on the trip, and I think that was one of the big moments of my life that set me up for what I lived my life out as. It kind of showed me that you could do whatever you want if you just stuck with it and put your mind to it. And it was an arduous expedition, but I survived it. About 2/3 of the group did, and 1/3 dropped out, kind of like I was hearing the fellow talk about his school time. So I felt that making it through was sort of a real transition and growth experience for me. Yeah, the biggest experience for me was I climbed with a few other students Cathedral, and I can't tell you which route it was. I think it was the cap closest to Verde Valley School, and I got very close to the top, and I made the mistake, and this was before my National Outdoor Leadership School, but I was climbing up the rope, and the piton came out of the mountain. I was about 25 feet up the hill, not up the hill, right towards the peak of the mountain, and I pulled the piton and fell onto a ledge 25 feet below, and if I hadn't have caught the ledge, I would have really gone another 100 feet down another ledge. So I was injured, but the interesting thing, there was a fellow above me, and it was just, we did this kind of as getting close to dusk, to the sunset, and because I had pulled the rope out, I was down 25 feet. He couldn't get off the mountain. And so the people, I was the second in the ascension. The people below us actually thought I had died on the mountain, so they went back to the school and announced that Roark had died on the mountain. So they sent out this rescue group to get the body off the mountain. And the fellow on the top took all of his clothes off, tied him in a knot, lowered him down so I could tie the rope onto him so he could pull it back up onto the mountain in the dark. So that was one of my big adventures at school. I survived Cathedral, yeah. Yes, I went to the Navajo, I was a junior, and so I went to the Navajo reservation and lived with a family, God, 50 miles from Chinle out there somewhere. And I remember they had 300 sheep, and I was with them for 12 days or so. And I would go herd the sheep every day, and I would lose 2 or 3 sheep, and I know they would actually go out and know where to find their sheep. But that was my field trip, was living with this one family, and that was wonderful. And we lived in this one-room house, and it was very basic, but it was very cool. So that was a wonderful part of the school. I'm going to say this one fellow, Richard Simmons, who was, again, the English teacher in admissions, who I just saw, Dick, about a year ago in San Francisco. So it was really nice. There's so many connections I made at that school that I'm still vibrantly connected with 40 years later, 50 years later. Dick was one, and I was a guitar student, and there was a resident guitar teacher, a classical guitar teacher, Samuel Guaranacha, who was the son of another of the admissions directors. So Sam was my personal classical guitar teacher, so I spent a lot of intensive time, and I was hearing you describe that word, I'd forgotten about the immersion deal. And I remember my immersion, if that's the right word, or the thing was to study and play guitar for 12 hours a day, and I never had gone so far on the instrument, whereas just playing for hours and hours, somehow I felt like I merged with my instrument. And in years since, I've become a professional musician, and my primary instrument is a concert pedal harp, but classical guitar led me into the music that I play today. So that was quite an influential and life setup that I'm grateful for today. My friends at the time, my closest people, they had built a hogan the year before, and it was a traditional Navajo hogan, and I would say about a 18 or 20 foot circumference, and 3 of the students lived in there. One was Gene McCain and Jonathan Meredith, who I'd mentioned earlier, and one other fellow, Jim Hamilton, who was the student body president of the year. And they had built this and then lived in it, and it was quite a primitive structure. I remember we covered it with plastic because when the rains came, the mud was dripping in. So it was a very authentic experience there. But that was probably where I hung out the most, was at the hogan, which I'm sure is not there anymore, but it was a big deal at the time. I heard someone else say this, and it resonated to me, as I would have wished I could have gone and spent more time there. I had 1 year there, and it was a very precious year, and I think we all get what we need, but if I could have probably controlled life, I would have asked for a few more years there. Because I came into it from a rather troubled, bullied high school experience. I didn't fit into the public school system. I was probably too sensitive, just felt out of place, and so to find Verde Valley School was like a big discovery. So if I could have gone earlier, that might have been great, but I think I was there just when I was supposed to be there.